key to the apartment.
Yeah, it's there.
Statue.
If the door isn't open, there's a key on the shelf
Okay,
under the
Here's
one
your
of the
keys right here.
statues.
got it.
Here, Becky,
That's okay, she'll get them. Okay, so you're gonna tell me about the house.
Well, we lived in a two-family house when we were growing up. We had the first floor, and Uncle Meyer and Auntie Heike had the second floor. And we all had bedrooms up on the third floor.
and when anybody came to visit, whether they were visiting us or the Auntie Heike, they always came to us. If it was her relatives would come from New York, because you couldn't sit in her furniture, they would come to my mother's house. They,
You couldn't sit on Heike's furniture?
no.
Why not?
She was crazy clean.
If the boys had company, they would bring their company to our house to make our house dirty.
We lived next door to the Faulkner Methodist Church on one side. On the other side of us lived a family called the Baggies. They were not Jewish. In fact, at that time the neighborhood was mostly not Jewish. So on Sundays, your great-grandmother wouldn't allow us to play outside because people were going to church and they were having the church services. And on the other side of us, the Baggies were very strict Baptist. And in the summertime, when we used to go to the beach, we used to go to Revere Beach to swim, we had to get dressed over our bathing suits because your great-grandmother wouldn't allow us to go out in the, because if the Baggies was sitting on their porch, it would offend them to see us in our bathing suits. So she was really very careful about
Well, we had,
not offending the neighbors, and we were brought up that way, so that's the way we are now.
see, our house, there was a corner. The main street was down here, and the Pierce Street, the street we lived on, came up and went onto Salem Street. Now, our father used to love to fuss with the garden. He planted shrubs and the shrub hedges and stuff like that. And he'd be out as soon as it was daylight to play with his garden. He loved it. And of course, my Uncle Ian never went near the garden. And they had a business. It was a wholesale dry goods business. My father were supposedly partners. And then I think they were because Cy was a salesman on the road, and their son worked inside.
Percy
Eddie Weber, cousin, was a salesman.
was the salesman.
Well, Percy was a salesman, but he stayed local. He didn't go on long trips. And Percy would have had a very, very rough time because Uncle Meyer was a very difficult person. However, he was afraid of my brother Cy, because if Cy left the business, the whole business would go apart. He was the salesman. And that driveway sat on the one side after the Baggies. Next to them was Mrs. Merrill.
Mrs. Merrill lived up on the corner of Line Street up on the hill.
Oh,
It was Lapidus's lived on the
no,
corner.
that was on Pierce Street, but I mean, there was our driveway into, the Lovejoys was one
Oh,
family.
in the backyard, yeah.
And who was the one,
The Lovejoys.
the Lovejoys, and the Lovejoys had a garage that overhung our driveway, and they had the best cherry tree in the world. Great big Bing cherries, and we would go up on top of the garage.
We had a big fence, and we used to climb the fence
Yeah.
and pick the cherries.
And pick his cherries, so they were.
Steal the cherries.
Yeah, but but there was, what was her name? The one between Baggy and Lovejoy? Merrill, with an M.
I can't think of her name. She lived alone, and she had a lot of cats.
Yeah, she was a recluse. And we had a good time because there were a lot of kids between our kids and the upstairs kids and the Maggies.
There was a big field behind the church, and between there was in front of, there was a house right in back of Grandma's great-grandma's house, and it was like a quadrangle. So there was a house here was the church, here was the house, and here was our house, and there's this big field in between. And all the kids used to congregate there to play. So,
Grandma told me one time about horse racing on the street. Did you guys do, or maybe it was Uncle Percy?
Uncle Percy probably told that because he remembers the horse, days when our father had the horse.
You don't remember it?
I don't remember
No,
the horse.
I remember a little of it, that our father went out on a horse and buggy to Reading, Wakefield, that area, to peddle his wares, and every week he'd buy them, and every week he'd go and collect the money. So if he bought a coat, which was $5 or $7, a lot of money those days, he would go every week to collect the money they owed him. And he would always take, I had a hard-boiled egg for lunch today, it reminded me, he would take hard-boiled eggs for lunch because he wouldn't eat any non-kosher. But also, he would just take a raw egg, and not very tasteful, but that's what he would have. However, when the Baggies, who were these straight-laced, had a son and a daughter. The daughter was my sister Bess's age,
Marion.
and Marion, and the son was more like Benny's age. And they both married black people.
Well, they weren't real black. They were high yellows.
Yeah, but they were blacks, and they accepted them. They used to come home.
They didn't really accept them. It was only after they became ill and infirm that they accepted them because they were able to help them.
Did you experience any anti-Semitism in the neighborhood?
What'd you say?
Did you experience any anti-Semitism in the neighborhood?
Well,
I don't think we experienced
I would
any.
say it was over anti-Semitism. I used to go to the Donovans lived around the corner on the short street, and two girls were my friends. And I'd go there Christmas to watch Santa Claus because they had an open hearth in the bedroom. And I'd go to watch Santa Claus. Well, I knew there was no Santa Claus, but I never told them. Helen and Helen Donovan and the sister, I think, Evelyn. And so we were friends in that way. And my mother went to a church once in her life. We had that church next door to us, and the black girl that was married to the baggy boy died.
Mm.
And my mother went to the services in that church because she was so fond of her. And the kids used to gather every night. At 9 o'clock there would be 3 whistles. And I don't know why they had those whistles, but we had to come in the house when those whistles blew. They were from the firehouse. I think it was just testing the equipment.
I don't remember any whistles.
And
I don't remember as a kid being able to stay out until 9 o'clock. We used to have to go to bed.
at the end of that driveway, there was what used to be the stables and the carriage house were all turned into stables for the horses and carriage houses for the carriages. Then they became automobile places for our cars. And it was rather unique. Not many people had cars at that time.
Do you remember when you first got a car?
Well, I remember a little bit, but I remember when I first drove, see, when you got to be old enough to be, my father, after there was 3 cars on the road, he never, and the boys were old enough to drive, he never would drive a car. And
I don't believe he ever drove, because the boys were of the age to drive. Of course, Uncle Louis lied about his age so he could get his license.
Really?
Yes, he did.
Well, he was
See,
very
there were
little.
no birth certificates for Uncle Louis, Uncle Benny, Uncle Si, and Auntie Bessie, because they didn't.
And Uncle Percy.
They didn't have any pieces of paper.
But I'll tell you another, to interrupt you, Aunt Bess had a terrible time becoming a citizen because they lied about her age so she could get admission or whatever, for whatever reason. And when she had to become a citizen, she was enlisted on my father's papers. And so she wasn't having any proof of her age. And
Who got that sorted out for you?
I don't remember, but we had, I'll tell you the story about your Uncle Louis and her